The morning sun cast strange purple shadows across the Galactic University campus as Professor Zelek prepared for his most challenging lecture of the semester. His 8 flexible arms moved with practiced precision as he arranged his teaching. Materials on the floating desk. The xenobiology classroom buzzed with nervous energy as students from 12 different species settled into their specially designed seats. Professor Zelek was a distinguished member of the Vorthek race, standing nearly 9 feet tall with skin that shifted between deep blue and silver depending on his mood. His 4 eyes could focus independently, allowing him to observe every student simultaneously while his remaining 4 arms gestured expressively during lectures. He had taught at the university for over 50 Earth years and was considered one of the finest xenobiology professors in the known galaxy. The classroom itself was a marvel of interspecies engineering. Each seat was customized for different body types and environmental needs. The crystalline Zephyrians sat on specially cooled platforms that prevented their silicon-based bodies from overheating. The aquatic nautilins remained partially submerged in their mobile water tanks. The insectoid Chitauri clustered together on their preferred metal perches, while the heavily armored Corvan students occupied reinforced benches designed to support their massive weight. Jake Martinez sat in the back corner in a simple human-sized chair, looking remarkably ordinary among his exotic classmates. He was 22 years old, average height with brown hair and dark eyes, wearing the standard blue jumpsuit of Earth's Colonial Academy exchange program. Most of his classmates had initially been curious about the human student, but after 3 months of classes, they had grown used to his presence and largely ignored him. Professor Zelek's mood shifted to a deeper blue as he began speaking, indicating a serious intent. His voice carried easily through the classroom's translation devices, ensuring every species could understand his words perfectly. Today would mark the beginning of their final practical examination, and he wanted to make sure every student understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The assignment was both simple and terrifying in its implications. Each student or team would be required to capture a live shadow maw from the university's wildlife preserve and present it to the class for behavioral analysis. The shadow maw was one of the most dangerous predators in the preserve, a creature that had evolved on the harsh world of Kithara Prime, where only the strongest and smartest survived. Shadow maw stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and measured nearly 12 feet from nose to tail. Its body was covered in scales harder than most metals, and 6 powerful legs ended in claws that could slice through reinforced steel. Its head was elongated like an earth crocodile, but filled with rows of teeth designed for both crushing bones and tearing flesh. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, which showed an intelligence that made many species uncomfortable. The creature's name came from its hunting technique. Shadow maws could remain perfectly still for hours, blending with their surroundings until they became nearly invisible. When prey approached, they would explode into motion with speed that defied their size. Adult shadow maws had no natural predators on their homeworld, and the university specimens had been carefully selected for their aggressive territorial behavior. Professor Zelek explained that capturing a shadow maw required careful planning, advanced technology, and perfect teamwork. The assignment was designed to test everything the students had learned about predator behavior, interspecies cooperation, and practical xenobiology. It was not uncommon for teams to spend weeks developing their capture strategies, and even then, success was far from guaranteed. The 3 crystalline Zephyrians immediately began discussing probability calculations and thermal analysis. Their crystalline bodies could process information at incredible speeds, making them natural strategists and analysts. Queth, their unofficial leader, was already formulating mathematical models for trap placement and energy requirements for containment fields. The 2 Corvan students, Thax and Groll, represented a warrior species known throughout the galaxy for their strength and courage. Their natural armor could withstand tremendous punishment, and their combat training made them formidable opponents for any predator. They spoke in low, rumbling voices about direct confrontation and the honor of facing such a dangerous beast in single combat. The four Chitauri students functioned as a single unit, their hive mind allowing them to coordinate actions with perfect precision. Prime Voice Clicks served as their spokesman, but all four could think and act as one organism when necessary. They excelled at complex engineering projects and had already begun designing elaborate mechanical traps that could work together in perfect synchronization. The two Nautilans, with their advanced biotechnology and aquatic origins, offered a different perspective entirely. Their species had mastered the art of biological modification and could create living tools designed for specific purposes. They whispered among themselves about growing custom organisms that could subdue the Shadow Maw without permanent harm. As the various species began forming their traditional multi-species teams, Jake raised his hand with a simple question that would change everything. His voice was calm and curious as he asked whether the Shadow Maw needed to be unconscious when presented to the class. The question struck the other students as hilariously naive, and several species made their equivalent of laughter. Professor Zelek found the human's apparent simplicity amusing but answered seriously. The creature needed to be alive and under control for proper behavioral observation, but the method of control was left to each team's discretion. Most successful teams had used combinations of stunning technology, restraint fields, and sedatives to keep their captured specimens manageable. What surprised everyone was Jake's next decision. When invited to join various teams, he politely declined each offer and stated his intention to work alone. The other students exchanged glances that clearly indicated their belief that the human had just signed his own academic death warrant. Even Professor Zelek raised two of his four eyebrows in concern, though he said nothing to discourage the young human's independence. As the class ended, and students began their excited planning sessions, Jake remained seated, apparently lost in thought. He made no notes about trap designs or capture equipment. Instead, he seemed to be considering something much simpler and more fundamental than his classmates could imagine. While they prepared for war against a dangerous predator, Jake was already thinking about something entirely different, something that would prove his human perspective could find solutions, where advanced alien intelligence saw only impossible challenges. The university's wildlife preserve stretched across 500 acres of carefully maintained alien ecosystems, each section designed to house creatures from different worlds under controlled conditions. The preserve served both as a research facility and a practical training ground for xenobiology students. Though few had ever attempted to capture anything as dangerous as a shadow maw, while his classmates threw themselves into weeks of intensive preparation, Jake took a completely different approach that baffled everyone who observed him. Each morning, he would arrive at the preserve shortly after dawn, carrying nothing more than a simple water bottle and a notebook that he rarely opened. Instead of scouting trap locations or testing capture equipment, he would find a comfortable spot on a hill overlooking the Shadow Maw territory and simply watch the Shadow Maw. Enclosure was a 20-acre section of rocky terrain, dotted with caves and sparse vegetation that mimicked their natural habitat on Cathara Prime. 3 adult Shadow Maws lived in this section, each maintaining its own territory while occasionally interacting with the others. Jake would sit for hours, observing their daily routines with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching animals behave naturally. His alien classmates found this behavior incomprehensible and increasingly amusing as the weeks passed. The Corvan students, Thax and Groll, had begun an intensive physical training program designed to increase their already impressive strength and endurance. They practiced combat maneuvers against holographic shadow maws, learning to anticipate the creature's attack patterns and identify weak points in its armored hide. Thax was particularly confident in their approach, often boasting to other students about how Coven warriors had faced similar predators on their homeworld. His species believed that showing respect to a dangerous opponent required meeting it in honest combat, and he saw the assignment as an opportunity to prove his warrior heritage. Groll supported his friend's enthusiasm, while secretly harboring doubts about whether even their advanced armor could withstand a Shadow Maw's claws. The Chitauri Collective had transformed their shared laboratory space into a miniature factory, working around the clock to construct their elaborate capture system. Prime voice clicks coordinated their efforts while the other three fabricated components with mechanical precision. Their plan involved dozens of interconnected devices that would work together to create an inescapable web of constraints around their target. Their design was genuinely impressive, featuring motion sensors, energy nets, gravitational anchors, and automated deployment mechanisms that could respond to a Shadow Maw's movements faster than any individual creature could react. The Chitauri had calculated every possible escape route and designed countermeasures for each scenario. Their hive-mind advantage meant that all components would activate in perfect synchronization, theoretically giving the Shadow Maw no opportunity to avoid capture. The three crystalline Zephyrions approached the problem from a completely different angle, treating it as a complex mathematical challenge that could be solved through superior analysis and planning. Queth spent countless hours running computer simulations, calculating optimal approach vectors, predicting behavioral responses, and determining the most efficient combination of stunning frequencies and containment protocols. Their crystalline physiology allowed them to process vast amounts of data simultaneously, and they had created detailed three-dimensional models of Shadow Maw anatomy, territory maps with precise measurements and probability matrices for every conceivable variable. Their plan relied on technological superiority and flawless execution rather than brute force or mechanical complexity. The two Nautilians had taken yet another approach, using their species' mastery of biotechnology to grow specialized organisms designed specifically for Shadow Maw capture. In their aquatic laboratory tanks, they cultivated living restraints that could adapt to their target's struggles, biological sedatives that would calm aggressive behavior, and even symbiotic creatures that could establish temporary mental connections with predators. Their method was perhaps the most elegant of all the proposed solutions, requiring minimal violence and offering the captured Shadow Maw the greatest chance of remaining unharmed during the process. The Nautilians believed that understanding and working with natural biological processes was always superior to fighting against them. Meanwhile, Jake continued his daily observations, apparently making no progress toward developing any kind of capture strategy. His notebook remained largely empty, containing only occasional sketches of Shadow Maw postures and brief notes about their behavior at different times of day. Other students began making jokes about the human's obvious lack of preparation, with some suggesting that he might be too frightened to attempt the assignment at all. Professor Zelek found himself increasingly curious about Jake's unusual approach. The human showed no signs of fear or anxiety despite his apparent lack of preparation. If anything, he seemed more relaxed and confident as the deadline approached. While his better-prepared classmates grew increasingly tense, the professor had studied human behavior extensively and recognized that their species often found unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible problems. But Jake's methods appeared to involve no planning whatsoever. What nobody realized was that Jake's seemingly passive observation was actually revealing patterns and insights that his technology-focused classmates were missing entirely. He had begun to notice that the Shadow Maws were not simply aggressive predators driven by instinct, but highly intelligent creatures with complex social relationships and emotional responses to their environment. The largest of the three Shadow Maws was clearly the territorial leader, a massive male who patrolled the borders of their enclosure and maintained dominance through displays of strength rather than actual violence. The second was a younger male who seemed more curious about the world beyond their territory, often approaching the observation areas when he thought no one was watching. The third was an older female with distinctive scars across her flanks, who showed the most complex behaviors of all. Jake had named her Luna in his private thoughts, and she had become the focus of his attention. Unlike the males, who were primarily concerned with territory and dominance, Luna seemed to be evaluating everything around her with careful intelligence. She watched the other students when they visited the preserve, studied the behavior of the preserve staff, and even appeared to be observing Jake himself during his daily vigils. Most importantly, Jake had begun to understand that Luna's apparent aggression was not random hostility but protective behavior. Her scars suggested a history of defending something important, and her territorial displays were more selective and purposeful than those of the males. She was not simply a dangerous predator to be subdued, but a thinking creature with her own motivations and concerns. As the final week of preparation began, Jake made his first actual move toward completing the assignment. He arranged a meeting with Dr. Ellen Hayes, the human xenobiologist who managed the preserve and oversaw the care of its many dangerous inhabitants. Dr. Hayes had been working with alien predators for over 15 years and had developed techniques for safe interaction that combined human intuition with advanced alien technology. Their conversation would prove to be the turning point in Jake's understanding of the assignment, though his classmates remained convinced that he was hopelessly unprepared for the challenge ahead. The practical examination began at dawn on a crisp morning when the preserve's artificial weather system had programmed a light mist to drift across the alien landscapes. Professor Zelek stood at the central observation platform, surrounded by monitoring equipment and emergency response systems, ready to oversee what he expected would be either spectacular successes or spectacular failures. Each team had been assigned a 4-hour window to attempt their capture, with full sensor coverage, and medical teams standing by in case of emergencies. The preserve's safety protocols were extensive, but shadow maws were unpredictable creatures, and even the best planning could not account for every possible scenario. The Corven team of Thax and Grohl entered the preserve first, their massive forms encased in ceremonial battle armor that had been polished to mirror brightness for the occasion. They carried traditional Corven weapons adapted for stunning rather than killing, along with modern containment equipment that could theoretically hold even a shadow maw once it had been subdued. Their approach was exactly what everyone expected from warriors of their species. They marched directly into shadow maw territory with no attempt at stealth, issuing formal challenges in their rumbling voices and preparing to meet their opponent in honorable combat. The plan was simple and direct, relying on their superior armor and combat training to overcome the creature's natural advantages. The first shadow maw to respond was the territorial male, the largest and most aggressive of the three. He emerged from behind a cluster of rocks with a display of dominance that would have terrified most species. Standing at full height with his claws extended and his jaws slightly open to show rows of deadly teeth, his scales shifted color from dark brown to deep red, indicating high aggression and territorial defense. Thax stepped forward to meet the challenge while Grohl moved to flank the creature, their coordination showing years of combat training and partnership. The battle that followed was impressive and terrifying to watch, a clash between advanced armor and natural weapons that had been refined by millions of years of evolution. The Corven armor proved capable of deflecting the shadow maw's claws and teeth, but the creature's strength and speed were beyond what they had anticipated. The beast moved like liquid violence, flowing around their attacks and striking from unexpected angles. Worse, it seemed to learn from each exchange, adapting its tactics to exploit the small gaps and weak points in their defensive positions. After 2 hours of increasingly desperate combat, both Corven warriors were exhausted and their armor showed deep scratches that revealed how close they had come to serious injury. The shadow maw, meanwhile, appeared barely winded and had grown more confident with each passing minute. Thax finally admitted defeat, and they retreated from the preserve with their pride wounded but their bodies intact. The Chitauri collective entered next, their elaborate trap system already partially deployed from careful pre-positioning over the previous days. Their approach was the opposite of the Corven method, relying on precision and technology rather than direct confrontation. Prime voice clicks coordinated their movements while the other three operated different aspects of their complex machinery. Their plan unfolded with mechanical perfection, creating a web of sensors and capture devices across 3 square kilometers of preserved territory. Motion detectors tracked every movement. Energy projectors stood ready to deploy containment fields, and gravitational anchors were positioned to prevent escape once the trap was triggered. The system was designed to respond faster than any biological creature could react. The younger male shadow maw approached their designated capture zone with apparent curiosity, drawn by the subtle energy emissions from their equipment. The Chitauri waited with hive-mind patience as their target moved deeper into the carefully prepared area, confident that their mathematical precision would succeed where brute force had failed. The trap activation was flawless, with dozens of devices responding in perfect synchronization to create an inescapable prison of energy and force. For a moment, it appeared that the Chitauri had achieved what the Corvan warriors could not. Their Shadow Maw was contained within overlapping fields. That should have prevented any possible escape, but the Chitauri had underestimated their opponent's intelligence. The Shadow Maw did not panic or thrash against the restraints as their calculations had predicted. Instead, it studied the energy patterns with obvious interest, testing different approaches and apparently analyzing the system's responses. Within 30 minutes, it had identified a resonance frequency that disrupted the field generators, and within an hour, it had systematically destroyed half of their equipment. The creature's methodical destruction of their trap was almost insulting in its deliberate precision. It seemed to understand exactly how their system worked and took obvious pleasure in dismantling their careful preparations piece by piece. The Chitauri collective watched in growing dismay as their mathematical perfection was defeated by superior adaptability and raw intelligence. The three crystalline Zephyrians took a more scientific approach, using advanced scanning equipment to analyze their target's biological systems before attempting capture. Queth led the team with calm confidence, their crystalline forms reflecting the preserve's lighting in beautiful but alien patterns as they moved through the terrain. Their strategy involved using specific sonic frequencies and light patterns that their research indicated should disorient and pacify the Shadow Maw long enough for containment systems to take effect. The approach was based on extensive study of similar predators from other worlds and represented the most sophisticated understanding of xenobiology principles that any student team had demonstrated. The older female Shadow Maw, Luna, was their chosen target. She appeared from her usual resting place among the rocks and observed their preparations with obvious interest. The Zephyrians interpreted her stillness as evidence that their approach was already having the desired calming effect, and they increased the intensity of their sonic treatment while moving closer with their containment equipment. Luna allowed them to approach within 20 feet before demonstrating that she had been studying their technique rather than being affected by it. She moved with sudden explosive speed that caught the Zephyrians completely off guard, not attacking them directly but instead destroying their sonic generators with surgical precision. Within minutes, their expensive equipment was scattered across the rocky ground in carefully broken pieces. The most disturbing aspect of Luna's response was her obvious intelligence in targeting their equipment while avoiding harm to the students themselves. She could easily have injured or killed any of the Zephyrians, but instead chose to neutralize their tools and then retreat to her previous position, where she resumed watching them with what appeared to be amusement. By the end of the third attempt, Professor Zelek was beginning to wonder whether the assignment might indeed be impossible. 3 teams of intelligent, well-prepared students had failed despite using completely different approaches and advanced technology. The Shadow Maws had not only defeated each attempt but had seemed to enjoy the intellectual challenge of overcoming their various strategies. The 2 Naudilans were scheduled to make their attempt the following day, and Jake had been assigned the final time slot of the examination period. Most observers expected the Naudilans to fail as well, despite their elegant biological approach, leaving the human student to face an assignment that had proven beyond the capabilities of species with far superior technology and natural advantages. Jake spent the evening of the failed attempt sitting in his usual observation spot, watching Luna as she settled into her nighttime routine. If he was concerned about the spectacular failures of his classmates, he showed no sign of worry. Instead, he seemed more focused and determined than ever, as though the other team's defeats had confirmed something important that he had suspected all along. Tomorrow would prove whether human intuition and patience could succeed where advanced technology and superior physical capabilities had failed, or whether the Shadow Maws would claim their 4th consecutive victory against the university's most challenging assignment. Jake entered the preserve just as the morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain where 3 teams of his classmates had already failed spectacularly. He carried only a simple backpack that appeared to contain basic supplies, moving, with none of the ceremonial preparation or technological confidence that had marked the previous attempts. Professor Zellick observed from the central platform, genuinely curious about what the human student planned to attempt. Unlike his predecessors, Jake made no effort to seek out the most accessible or predictable target. The territorial male was, still recovering from his battle with the Kovan warriors, and the younger male seemed warier after his encounters with the Chitauri traps. Instead, Jake walked deliberately toward the section of territory where Luna, the scarred female, typically spent her mornings. His approach was unlike anything the monitoring systems had recorded during previous capture attempts. Jake moved slowly and deliberately, making no effort to conceal his presence but showing none of the aggressive intent that had marked the other teams. His posture was relaxed, his movements predictable, and most remarkably, he was talking in a low, steady voice as he walked. Luna emerged from her resting place among the rocks exactly as Jake had expected, her massive form moving with the fluid grace that made shadow maws such effective predators. But instead of the territorial displays or aggressive posturing that had greeted the other teams, she simply watched Jake with obvious curiosity. Her scales remained their neutral brown color, indicating alertness without hostility. Jake stopped approximately 50 feet away from Luna and slowly lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the ground. His movements were careful and deliberate, designed to communicate peaceful intentions through body language that transcended species barriers. He continued speaking in the same low, calm voice. Though the monitoring equipment could not clearly detect what he was saying, Professor Zellick leaned forward in fascination as he watched this unprecedented interaction unfold. In 50 years of teaching xenobiology, he had never observed a student attempt to communicate with a shadow maw rather than simply trying to capture it. The approach violated every established protocol for dealing with dangerous predators, yet Luna's relaxed posture suggested that Jake's method was having exactly the intended effect. What happened next defied every assumption that the academic community held about human-predator interactions. Jake reached into his backpack and withdrew what appeared to be food, not the technical equipment or weapons that previous teams had carried. He placed several items on the ground between himself and Luna, then slowly moved backward to give her space to investigate. Luna approached the offering with obvious caution, her intelligent eyes never leaving Jake's face as she examined what he had brought. The food was clearly chosen specifically for her species, suggesting that Jake had researched shadowmaw dietary preferences with the same careful attention he had devoted to observing their behavior. She accepted his gift and consumed it slowly, watching him throughout the process. Jake had spent weeks learning to interpret shadowmaw body language and vocalizations, knowledge that his classmates had dismissed as irrelevant to their technological solutions. He recognized the subtle shift in Luna's posture that indicated growing comfort with his presence, and he responded by moving slightly closer while maintaining the same calm, respectful demeanor. The breakthrough came when Luna made a low vocalization that Jake had heard before during his weeks of observation. It was not the aggressive growl or territorial warning that most species would expect from such a predator, but something closer to curiosity or even greeting. Jake attempted to replicate the sound, his human vocal cords producing a reasonable approximation that caused Luna's ears to twitch with what appeared to be amusement. Professor Zellick found himself completely absorbed in documenting this extraordinary interaction. The monitoring equipment was recording everything, but he knew that mere data could not capture the remarkable communication that was developing between the human student and the most dangerous predator in the preserve. Luna was not being subdued or controlled. She was choosing to engage with Jake as an equal. Over the next 2 hours, Jake demonstrated patience and respect that gradually earned Luna's trust. When she made mock charges to test his reactions, he neither fled in panic nor stood his ground aggressively. Instead, he moved backward in a measured way that acknowledged her power while showing that he understood her signals were tests rather than genuine attacks. The most remarkable moment occurred when Luna deliberately exposed her scarred flank to Jake, allowing him to see the old wounds that had shaped her cautious and protective behavior. Jake had theorized during his observations that her aggression stemmed from past trauma rather than natural hostility, and her willingness to show vulnerability confirmed his understanding of her psychology. Jake reached slowly toward Luna's scars, moving with the same careful deliberation that had characterized his entire approach. Luna remained still, allowing this unprecedented physical contact with a being from another species. Jake's touch was gentle and respectful, acknowledging her pain while offering comfort that transcended the barriers between their very different forms of life. The monitoring equipment registered Luna's physiological responses to Jake's presence, showing decreased stress hormones and increased production of chemicals associated with social bonding. Professor Zelek realized he was witnessing something that would revolutionize their understanding of interspecies communication and cooperation. The human student was not capturing a hostile beast, he was forming a genuine friendship with a highly intelligent creature. As the hours passed, Luna became increasingly comfortable with Jake's presence. She allowed him to move freely within her territory, something she had never permitted any other being to do. More remarkably, she began initiating interactions, approaching Jake when he moved away and even engaging in what appeared to be play. Behavior: Jake's backpack contained more than food, as it turned out. He had brought grooming tools designed for creatures with scales similar to Luna's, and he offered to help her reach areas that were difficult for her to clean herself. This service was something that Shadowmaws typically performed for each other in family groups, and Luna's acceptance of Jake's assistance represented a level of trust that even Professor Zelek found difficult to believe. By the end of his allocated time period, Jake had achieved something that everyone had considered impossible. Luna was not his captive, she was his partner. She responded to his requests not because she had been broken or controlled, but because she had chosen to trust him. When Jake began walking toward the preserve exit, Luna followed him voluntarily, staying close enough to provide protection, while maintaining the dignity of a creature that was cooperating rather than being coerced. Professor Zelek watched in amazement as Jake and Luna approached the preserve boundary together. The human student had not only completed the assignment, he had redefined what success could look like. Instead of demonstrating dominance over a dangerous predator, he had proven that understanding and respect could achieve results that technology and force could not. The implications of what he had witnessed would require years of study to fully understand. Jake had opened possibilities for interspecies cooperation that the academic community had never seriously considered. Tomorrow's presentation would not simply be the conclusion of a student assignment, it would mark the beginning of a new era in xenobiological research. As Jake and Luna disappeared from view, heading toward the university campus together, Professor Zelek began preparing his colleagues for what they were about to witness. The human student was about to prove that his species' greatest strength was not their technology or their aggression, but their remarkable ability to find common ground with even the most unlikely allies. The xenobiology lecture hall had never been as crowded as it was on the morning of the final presentations. Word had spread throughout the university about the spectacular failures of the previous attempts, and faculty members from multiple departments had arrived to witness what many expected would be the conclusion of an impossible assignment. Professor Zelek stood at his floating podium, his 4 independent eyes scanning the assembled crowd while his 8 arms organized the presentation materials. The Corvin team of Thax and Grohl presented first, their massive forms still showing traces of the scratches their armor had sustained during their battle with the territorial male Shadowmaw. They spoke with the honest dignity of warriors who had faced a superior opponent and found themselves wanting, but their analysis of the creature's combat capabilities was thorough and impressive. Thax described the Shadowmaw's incredible speed and adaptability, noting how the creature had learned from each exchange and modified its tactics accordingly. Grohl provided detailed observations about the beast's intelligence, pointing out that their opponent had deliberately targeted weak points in their armor with surgical precision, rather than simply attacking with brute force. Their presentation concluded with a recommendation that the assignment might be reconsidered, as the Shadow Maw's combination of physical prowess and tactical intelligence made capture by conventional means extremely difficult if not impossible. Several faculty members nodded in agreement, impressed by the thoroughness of their analysis, despite their failure to complete the actual task. The Chitauri Collective presented next, with prime voice clicks coordinating their detailed technical analysis while the other three provided visual displays of their elaborate trap system. Their presentation was a masterpiece of engineering documentation, showing precisely how their mechanical web had been designed to account for every possible escape route and behavioral response. The most disturbing aspect of their presentation was their analysis of how the younger male Shadow Maw had systematically destroyed their equipment. The creature had not simply broken their traps through brute force, but had apparently understood the underlying principles and deliberately targeted the most critical components. The Chitauri had recorded the entire encounter, and the footage showed a level of problem-solving ability that challenged basic assumptions about predator intelligence. Prime voice clicks concluded by noting that their failure had revealed something far more significant than their original assignment had intended to test. The Shadow Maws were not simply dangerous animals to be captured and studied, but highly intelligent beings capable of analytical thinking and deliberate strategy. Their recommendation was that future research should focus on communication rather than capture. The three crystalline Zephyrians followed with a presentation that combined mathematical analysis with philosophical implications. Queth led their discussion of probability matrices and behavioral predictions, showing how their careful calculations had accounted for every variable except the most important one. The creature's capacity for learning and adaptation, their analysis of Luna's response to their sonic treatment was particularly revealing. The older female had not simply ignored their attempts at pacification. She had studied their technique and then demonstrated her understanding by precisely destroying their equipment while avoiding any harm to the students themselves. This suggested not only intelligence but also a moral framework that distinguished between acceptable and unacceptable responses to perceived threats. The Zephyrians concluded that their failure had been inevitable because they had approached the assignment with fundamentally incorrect assumptions about the nature of intelligence and consciousness in non-humanoid species. Their detailed mathematical models had been useless because they had failed to account for the possibility that their target might be as intelligent as they were. Professor Zelek found himself genuinely impressed by the quality of analysis that his students had provided despite their failures to complete the practical assignment. Each team had contributed valuable insights about Shadow Maw behavior and intelligence that would advance the field of xenobiology significantly. He was beginning to compose remarks about the educational value of challenging impossible tasks when the lecture hall doors burst open with dramatic timing. Jake Martinez walked calmly into the room, and beside him, moving with predatory grace, that sent several faculty members scrambling toward the exits, walked Luna the Shadow Maw. The massive creature's presence transformed the academic atmosphere into something primal and immediate. Yet Luna showed no signs of aggression or distress. She moved with obvious purpose, occasionally glancing at Jake as though checking for guidance or reassurance. The lecture hall fell into stunned silence, broken only by the soft clicking of Luna's claws against the floor and the barely audible hum of the emergency containment systems that had automatically activated. But Luna paid no attention to the technological precautions, focusing entirely on Jake's calm presence and the fascinating new environment she was exploring. Jake addressed Professor Zelek with the straightforward honesty that had characterized his approach throughout the semester. His voice carried easily through the sudden quiet as he explained that he had brought Luna not as a captured specimen but as a willing participant in an unprecedented demonstration of interspecies cooperation and communication. What followed was a presentation unlike anything the university had ever witnessed. Jake demonstrated Luna's intelligence through a series of interactions that showed her capacity for complex problem-solving, emotional recognition, and even what appeared to be humor. Luna responded to Jake's request not with the mechanical obedience of a trained animal, But with the thoughtful cooperation of an equal partner, the most remarkable aspect of their demonstration was Luna's obvious comfort with the academic environment. She explored the lecture hall with curiosity rather than territorial aggression, examined the various alien students with interest rather than hostility, and even approached Professor Zelek's podium to investigate the floating technology with apparent fascination. Jake explained his methodology in simple terms that emphasized patience, respect, and genuine curiosity about Luna's perspective and experiences. He had not sought to dominate or control her, but to understand her motivations and establish communication based on mutual trust. His approach had required weeks of careful observation and gradual relationship building, but had resulted in cooperation that no technological solution could have achieved. Professor Zelek found his academic composure completely shattered by what he was witnessing. Luna was not simply tolerating the classroom environment, she was actively participating in it. When Jake asked her to demonstrate her problem-solving abilities, she engaged with the challenges as though she understood the educational purpose. Behind them, the presentation concluded with Jake's simple but revolutionary assertion that the assignment had been based on incorrect assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and species. Luna was not a hostile beast to be captured and studied, but a thinking being capable of choice, cooperation, and even friendship across the barriers that separated their very different forms of life. As Jake and Luna prepared to leave the lecture hall, Professor Zelek realized that everything he thought he knew about interspecies interaction needed to be reconsidered. The human student had not simply completed an impossible assignment. He had opened entirely new possibilities for understanding and cooperation between intelligent species throughout the galaxy, the final image that would remain in every observer's memory was Jake and Luna walking together across the university campus, not as master and captive, but as partners exploring the infinite possibilities that arose when different forms of intelligence chose to work together rather than against each other. The human had proven once again that his species' greatest gift was not their technology or their aggression, but their remarkable ability to find friendship in the most unexpected places and with the most unlikely allies.